Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we will be talking about the various models and transport geography. So we'll be classifying the models on three basic criteria. The first is the transportation corridors, based on which we'll be talking about the various models. So our three basic classification would be first, transport corridors. Second is the models based on spatial interactions. And third is the models based on spatial input and output. Okay, so we'll start with the first kind of classification, that is transport models based on transport corridors. So the first is the location and accessibility model. This model has been propounded as a modification from the central place theory. So in the previous sessions where we talked about central place theory, we talked about the hexagonal structure of the market and the relation between the transport arteries. So here we can see, here is one center and here is another center. So you have a kind of linear linkage or a major linkage which is of higher order between the two major centers or markets. And then you have a peripheral market, which is a point in each smaller hexagon or each smaller town. So you have a kind of linear model or transportation which is developing here. So this was the concept propounded under the location and accessibility model, which was the modification of central place theory. The next model we here talk about is the spatial interdependency model. Under spatial interdependency model, we talk about specializations, okay, and interdependency. So this model was given in 1961 by Gottman. Gottman in this model talked about creation of large urban corridors. So he said specialization occurs at low cost and you try to increase the trade. So what is happening here? The center region is having higher interdependency as compared to the peripheral region. Okay, so the peripheral region here does not have that much interdependency, while the center region has much higher interdependency. So transport, according to Gottman's spatial interdependency model, transport is a function of regional specialization. So the regions which specialize more have higher transportation. The next is the distribution or flow model. This model was basically considering the fact that there is an interface between the global market. Supposedly this is a global market. Then you have the national market and a regional market. So you have interdependencies between the two. Then you have interdependency with this region, with the periphery, and so on. So this is a kind of flow model or distribution model. And according to this model, the large urban centers act as collection point for the smaller centers. So these act as collection point for small centers. Okay. All these three models came into existence under the concept of transport corridors. The transport corridors concept was improved and there was a concept of what is known as modeling of human behavior that was introduced into the transport corridors. And under human behavior, what was discussed was the LILT model. So LILT model basically says people have a tendency to visit a particular place during a particular time. For example, let's say the festival of Christmas. Okay, you have winter wonderlands or winter snow parks. Okay, so you have a kind of particular place where people are visiting only during the winters when there is a snowfall. Okay. So that is what is the concept of logic model, which says human behavior tries to visit particular places at particular time, and this is probabilistic in nature. So there is higher probability of visiting people in that season or at that point of time of the year. So these were the concepts given under transport corridors. Now the next classification talks about spatial integration. Under the spatial interaction models, we will be first talking about the most important model, which is the Lowry model. So here is what we call as the Lowry model. Of course, from the name as it suggests, was propounded by Lowry. So this model was the first of its kind for transport and land use purposes, propounded in 1964. Okay, it was given in the form of flowchart and it is basically demand driven. So since it is demand driven, we can say that it is affected by two phenomena. The first is the spatial interaction between basic employment, and second is the zone of residence. These two things basically were the founding blocks to classify the Lowry's model. So you start with exogenously given export industries for employment. You allocate the export industries to the workers in every area. Then you try to understand what is the demand from that region. You try to allocate your services based on the demand. Then you re-estimate what would be the real demand. Then you check it. If you are fulfilling that, you will try to allocate the services. If you are not, the solution is not complete. That was what Lowry tried to explain through the means of this flowchart. The next spatial interaction model is the ITLUP, that is the Integrated Transport Land Use Package. This model was given by Putman. So Putman talked about integrated transport and land use. Okay, under this concept, he classified three fundamental things. DRAM, that is the disaggregated residential allocated units. The next is the employment allocation model, or the EAM. So this is residential. Then you have employment, and the next is TDM, that is travel demand model. So under the travel demand model, under the integrated transport and land use program, what he tried to explain was the concept based on residential requirements, employment, and travel needs. The next model that is important under the spatial interaction models is the LILT, that's the Leeds Integrated Land Use Transport Model. This was propounded by Mackett. It basically tried to combine the concept of Lowry plus the concept of car ownership. So he propounded a unique model for transportation which was based on the concept of Lowry and the car ownership. The next model here is IRPUD, where we try to understand the concept of macro, meso, and micro scale. In this concept, we try to understand that there is a stimulation model of intra-regional location and mobility. So in this model, we try to explain the aging population, the dwelling, the relocation services, okay, new job or kind of job change. So all these concepts were introduced under the IRPUD model. The most important and the last in this model is the cellular automata. So under cellular automata, what we try to explain is the complex behavior between natural and social process. So what we try to understand is the natural versus the social process that occur in reality. Okay. So it includes the vegetation, the hydrology, the concepts of soil, epidemics, and the urban growth, how it is affected by these phenomena. So this cellular automata concept is based on 5 basic characteristics. They talk about discrete lattices, which are known as sites. Okay. They talk about evolution of these discrete lattice under the timestamp or the time step, we can say. Now, every site has finite possible values. So each site has finite values that would be considered, and these values are based on deterministic rule. Okay, so there are certain rules based on which the values of each site is being determined, and finally, this rule is dependent on the neighborhood. So this was again another classification which was included under the Spatial Interaction Model of Cellular Automata, where they try to explain the interaction of transportation network between the various phenomena. The next concept is based on spatial input and output models. So under the spatial input and output models, there are again four basic models that we will be talking about today. First is MEPLAN. This is a kind of interaction between the market and the transport. So it's a kind of aggregate model which talks about interaction between market and the transport facilities. It tries to divide the space into zones. So you have various zones and you try to allocate various activities to each zone. So for example, zone 1 is fishing, zone 2 is mining. So you try to allocate different activities to different zones. You try to give information about the employment sector in each zone. So for each zone, I have the information on employment, I have the information on population, the income levels, the number of cars each household is having, the land use in each zone, and finally the floor space. Based on this, I can try to find out the relation between the market and the transport networks. The next model here is the TRANUS model. This is an integrated land use and transport modeling system. And what you are trying to do, it tries to simulate the concept of land use, transport, economic activity, and financial activities in a region. Okay, so it talks about various production zones and is mainly based on supply. So it's, as Lowry was a demand-driven model, TRANUS is a supply model where you try to simulate the expected behavior. How much should be supplied to a particular area in order to get the best out of it. Okay, so there is a production path between the origin and the destination. So that is what it is trying to explain under the TRANUS model. The next is the PECAS. This model talks about exchange and consumption. So it talks about production, P for production, E for exchange, C for consumption, allocation system. So under this, you try to talk about the production, exchange, and consumption. So it's an interrelation between, it's made by both MEPLAN and TRANUS model. It has 3 levels. So level 1 talks about activity location. Level 2 talks about technical options. Level 3 talks about exchange options. Okay, both of these are space development modules. They try to simulate the changes in various developmental stages, and it basically predicts the travel conditions in a region. The next and the final model we'll be discussing today is the DELTA model. So DELTA model is basically defined for both urban and regional level. Okay, it is based on the input to land use model. Okay, so under DELTA model, what we are trying to explain is the demography and the employment exchange. So the demography or the population of the region and the employment exchange in the region. So this is again a kind of economic growth model where you try to classify things based on various sectors. Okay, and it tries to predict the location of any activity. So these are the four major kinds of models that would be included under the spatial input and output classification. So with this, we cover the various kinds of models that are talked about in transportation geography. In the next class, we will be talking about the concept of network analysis, the alpha, beta, and the gamma indexes. Along with that, we will be discussing the concept of accessibility and connectivity. So have a good day ahead.